All right, let me just give you some instruction quickly. You have 4 pages of outline. I promise you, I'm not going to go through them all. Who said few?
Oh, no, it's 2 pages? Oh, my.
But what the second page is, which starts with, where am I? Personal health management. That's for you to take home, and it's like a cheat sheet. You can go through it on your own. Okay? Anybody got an outline? All right, everybody got an outline. So the first 2 pages is the message today. The last 2 is for your own personal edification. Encourage you to go through it, pray through it. And those who are online, you do have them as well. And if I'd known Adam and Jenny would be here, they would have spoken, not me. But here we go. So I feel quite intimidated. Yeah, maybe they can. All right, here we go. Mental health, I believe, is the unseen, unspoken epidemic of our age, especially since COVID. And so over the past number of weeks, we've been looking at the whole question of mental health and the crisis that it is that not many are talking about. I mentioned previous times Nikola Tesla, one of the smartest men who ever lived. He had a photographic memory, spoke 8 languages fluently, and besides his OCD and some other issues, he was called the man who invented the 20th century. During his life, he struggled with issues that back then many called him eccentric. Some speculated that Tesla might have been a high-functioning autistic who'd become obsessed with cleanliness and germs. He had his food boiled, always boiled, to make sure it was germ-free. He avoided shaking hands, and if he could not avoid that, he wore gloves. This fear of physical contact probably is why he never married and remained celibate throughout his life. He also got fixated on the number 3. If he did shake your hand, it was done in sets of 3. Same with the washing of his hand. He had to do it 3 times. He had 18 napkins on his table when he sat down for a meal. It was 6 sets of 3. When he stayed in a hotel, it was in a room on a floor that was divisible by 3. When he died at the Hotel New Yorker of a coronary thrombosis, it was in room 3327. For those who don't know maths, 3 goes into 3327. Okay. You should read up on Tesla. He's an absolutely fascinating man. And you might know somebody who struggles with different issues, whether it's depression, OCD, being afflicted with some or other challenge. I could name a bunch of them, but I'm a pastor, I'm not a counselor, and so I won't, because I hate putting labels on people. It's demeaning and most times downright rude and certainly insensitive, and it's not what Jesus would have done. And so here's a definition of mental health. It is a state of mental well-being that enables people to cope with the stresses of life, realize their abilities, learn well and work well, and contribute to their communities. It is an integral component of health and well-being that underpins our individual and our collective ability to make decisions, build relationships, shape the world we live in, and it is crucial to personal, community, and socio-economic development. Mental health is more than just the absence of mental disorder. It exists in a complex continuum which is experienced differently from one person to the next, with varying degrees of difficulty and distress, and potentially very different social and clinical outcomes. And so throughout our lives, multiple individual, social, and structural determinants may combine to protect or undermine our health and shift our position on the mental health continuum. Exposure to unfavorable social, economic, geopolitical, and environmental circumstances, including poverty, violence, and inequality, economic deprivation, increase the person's risk of experiencing a mental health condition. Risks can be manifest at all stages of life, but those that occur during developmentally sensitive periods, especially early childhood, are extremely and particularly detrimental. For example, harsh parenting, excessive physical punishment, and even at times in the classroom are known to undermine a child's health. Bullying is a leading risk factor for mental health conditions. And so protective factors similarly occur throughout our lives and serve to strengthen resilience. They include our individual and social and emotional skills and attributes, as well as positive social interactions, quality education, decent work, safe neighborhoods, and community cohesion, amongst other things. And of course, parenting plays such a role in a person's well-being as they grow up. Local threats heighten risks for individuals and families and communities. Global threats heighten risk for whole populations and include economic downturns, where maybe the person, father, mother, had great jobs, and then COVID hit, they're without work, and they're struggling to survive. And also disease outbreaks, humanitarian emergencies, and forced displacement. I don't know about you, but if you've watched anything on Ukraine, and you see these people, over 4 million have streamed across the borders into these other countries. My thought, obviously it affects the adults, but my thought goes to those little people, those kids that have been displaced from everything they know, bombs all around, they're running away, they are just facing unbelievable problems. And then I looked the other day at a video of these camps where ISIS wives and their children are in these camps, and there's 2 and 3 million people in those camps. And my heart went out for those little people. You wonder if they'll ever be the same. And we can look at populations around the world where this stuff is going on, and I think of the little people and what they face. And then I think, just in a continuum, I think of what resources do they have to even begin to deal with that stuff. And so we in the West, we supply the guns and the rockets and all of that kind of stuff, and I'm not saying that's wrong. But what about the children of war? Every single risk and protective factor have only limited predictive strength. Most people do not develop a mental health condition in spite of exposure to a risk factor, and many people with no known risk factor still develop mental health conditions. Nonetheless, the interacting determinants of mental health serve to enhance or undermine mental health. I'll tell you about a man. He was born, Eric White, on the 24th of March, 1874, in Budapest, Hungary. He moved with his family to America, changed his name to Harry Houdini, and became one of, if not the greatest illusionist in performing daring and spectacular escapes. Harry Houdini, the famous escape artist, issued a challenge wherever he went, and he said he could be locked in any jail, in any town, any time, and he would escape. But one time, something went terribly wrong. He entered the jail in his street clothes, and the heavy doors clanged shut behind him. He took out a concealed piece of metal from his belt and set to work immediately. But something was unusual about this lock. For 30 minutes he worked and got nowhere. An hour passed and he still hadn't opened the door. By now he was bathed in sweat and panting and exasperation. He still couldn't pick the lock. Finally, after laboring for about 2 hours, he collapsed in frustration and failure against the door that would not unlock. And when he fell against the door, exhausted, the door swung open. You see, it had never been locked at all. And he didn't figure that out. In his mind, it was locked. And that was all it took to keep him from opening the door and walking out of that jail cell. Mental health is important at every stage of life and determines how we handle stress, relate to one another, and make choices. So to underscore what I'm saying, I just looked at some statistics from the Mental Health Association, and you can look for it on their website, mhanational.org. In 2021, over 5.4 million people took a mental health screen, representing nearly a 500% increase over the number of people who completed that screening in 2019. The largest increase in the percentage of people scoring positive from 2019 to 2021 were on the parent and youth screens. There was a significant increase in the percentage of people scoring at the risk of PTSD, severe anxiety, and psychotic-like experiences. You know, as far back as 2000, the World Health Organization declared that 5 out of 10 leading causes of disabilities in the world are mental conditions. And they listed the conditions: major depression, schizophrenia, bipolar disorders, alcohol and substance abuse, and obsessive compulsive disorder. Both mental health and physical health changes throughout our lives, and unlike our bodies, our minds can become unwell. Mental health problems are more common than you think, and sometimes some people that you know are affected with mental health. Maybe there's somebody in your sphere of influence that at some level are on the continuum. I'm not saying that they are so disoriented or debilitated, but they might be on the continuum that they are suffering through depression or whatever. And my question is, for the church, what do we do about it? I said it last week. When Homeland Security was first formed, they had this advertising, this banner that went out, see something, say something. My challenge to the church is, if you see something, do something about it. I don't know what it is, but the best thing we can do is start praying. We can find a counselor for this person. We can interact with this person and say, listen, I see there's some stuff going on in your life. What can I do to help you? Unfortunately, the world out there doesn't understand much about it. And secondly, they don't know how to deal with it. And thirdly, there are such limited resources as relates to mental health, even from the state. The effects are as real as a broken arm, even although there isn't a sling or a plaster cast to show for it. Many factors contribute to mental health problems, including biological factors, such as genes or brain chemistry, life experiences such as trauma or abuse, family history of mental health problems, and I can go on and list a bunch of other factors. But let me move on by asking you this. Have you ever read the book Pilgrim's Progress? Written in the 17th century, but the message is still valid today. The main character of that book is called Christian, who is on a journey from the city of destruction to the celestial city. As he journeys, he comes across obstacles that cannot be avoided. One one such place is the Slough of Despondent, where pilgrims can find themselves sinking in the mire. Depending on the size of the burden they have on their back, they might find it difficult to get out. Christian has this problem until a man named Help, who represents the Holy Spirit, comes along and pulls him out. Christian asks Help why this place has not been fixed so that this journey might be easier and more secure for other pilgrims. Help responds and says, this place cannot be mended. And no matter how mature we are, no one is immune to these places. These places cannot be mended, only traveled through. And for some people, unfortunately, they are on a very long journey through that. And as you can see from this classic story, it is not by our own efforts that we get through this. It is by, we need help. Some people may need medication to help. Others might need assistance of counseling services. And of course, we all need a support of a network of friends and family and a loving, caring church community. All of us, with or without any additional support, we also need the help, the helper, the Holy Spirit. Experts tell us that our attitudes, choices, and actions are often the instigating factors that trigger or sustain mental and emotional upheaval and volatility. And then as Christians, we have our own set of battles as well. We battle with temptations. We battle with old habits. And lifestyles start to resurface if we don't stay close to God. We battle with the onslaught of the attitudes and the values of the world. One evening, an old Cherokee Indian told his grandson about a battle that goes on inside of people. He said, "My son, the battle is between two wolves inside all of us. One is evil, and that is anger and envy and jealousy and greed and arrogance, while the other is good. It is peace, love, hope, humility, compassion, and faith." And then the grandson asked his grandfather, "Which wolf wins?" The old man replied, "The one you feed." The one you feed. So Paul, in Philippians chapter 4, verse 1 to 9, we find a number of factors that result in emotional and mental problems. And you know, I said this before. On Kindle, in Amazon, this was the most looked at verse, was this particular one. Philippians chapter 4, verse 1 to 9. Verse 1 says, "So stand firm in the Lord." Stand firm is a military term. You take your position and you do not move. Gabby spoke about it already this morning. You may be under attack, but it is not a time for retreating. And how many people don't you know when they feel discombobulated, when they feel anxiety, when they feel problems are happening in their lives, they actually retreat from everybody. And that's when they should be standing firm and reaching out and saying, "Hey, I need your help." Each one of these instructions he gives is related to an area where we will be attacked. Firstly, the devil, and then our own sinfulness. So let's look at these commandments quickly. "Therefore, my brothers and sisters, you whom I love and long for, my joy and my crown." Verse 1 says, "Stand firm in the Lord in this way, my dear friends." He wanted us to be united together as we stand. The picture is more like a teams of tug of war standing firm and not giving ground to the opposing forces. But more than that, they attempt to pull the other team over the line towards themselves. Teams that just hang on are likely to be defeated. If you're just saying, "Well, I'm not going anywhere, I'm standing firm," if you just stay there, most likely you will be defeated. We stand firm, not giving ground to the forces that oppose us, as we find our strength in the Lord. And then he goes on, verse 2. I plead, and he mentions two women there, to be of the same mind in the Lord. The Apostle Paul's second admonition is that these Christians have the same mind or the same attitude, that they agree with one another. You see, it is so detrimental in a church. And I know it doesn't happen in this church, but it's so detrimental if you have feuding factions in any church. Because it's certainly not unity. It would seem that everybody, as we read these scriptures, it would seem that everybody knew about the issues of these two women, what they were having. And that's why the apostle probably names them. Our negative talking about others are all visible signs of disunity. You know, Stephen Hawking was considered one of the greatest thinkers of this century, last century and into this century. But you know, he couldn't tie his own shoes, brush his teeth, or even comb his hair. The reason he couldn't do this is because he had Lou Gehrig's disease, the disease that causes nerves to disconnect from each other. And so the messages from that incredible mind, from the incredible head, brain, doesn't pass through the nerve pathways into his body. He was able to hold huge and handle huge mathematical equations in his mind. And he did his thinking without any notes whatsoever. Typing for him is laboriously done through methods that possibly only a handicapped person could appreciate. He could not use his fingers, and he could not hold an apparatus in his teeth. All he could do to communicate was blow into a tube. Can you imagine communicating that way? Now, here's my point. There was nothing wrong with his head. It was his body that was dysfunctional. The New Testament makes it clear that our head, Jesus Christ, there's absolutely nothing wrong with him. It's we, the church, who is dysfunctional. And so often, just like Stephen Hawkins, God struggles with a crippled body. There's nothing wrong with the head, but the body is dysfunctional. Verse 4 and onwards to 7, he says, rejoice in the Lord always. When I'm down, when I'm up, when I'm sideways, when I don't feel like it, when I'm not feeling good, rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again, he writes. Rejoice. Let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. Don't be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God that transcends all understanding will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Reminds me of the story of a man who was walking by a table in a hotel and noticed 3 men and a dog playing cards. Noticing this unusual sight, the man stopped and commented, "This must be a very smart dog." One of the guys popped up and he said, "He ain't so smart because every time he gets a good hand, he wags his tail." So here's the lesson from that. When we have joy in our hearts, it shall be obvious to everybody. They should see us wagging our tails. Proverbs 15:13, a joyful heart makes a cheerful face. Oh, by the way, my joke was far better than Gabby's this morning, wasn't it? All right. I know she's your favorite. So often, we look for joy in all the wrong places. For instance, we look to other people for our happiness. That's why some people bounce from relationship to relationship to relationship. Or maybe it's possession and materials and things like that. But let me ask you, when you buy this brand new, fancy new car, how long does the new smell last? Not very long, does it? When you buy that fancy new car, How often, well, how long does it take for you to just stop polishing that thing every week? So, or we try to go from one experience to another, trying to look for that momentary high. You see it be, and I don't mind us being sports fans, but you see some people, they go to some of these sports games and they sink almost their whole life into that sports game. They dress up, they got the masks on, and they got the paint on and all that kind of stuff. But when they walk out of that stadium, especially if the Seahawks have lost, what have they got? But next time we go, that experience is going to be good. And so they get all their war paint on and their masks and all that junk on, and they go in and they win and they're elated for a day. And then Monday morning comes, they've got to go back to work. And then when things are favorable, we're happy. We have some joy, but soon they are over and we go back to what we started. You see, rejoice in the Lord always. And again, I say rejoice. Let me encourage you. All of us face times when we feel down. It's never always smooth sailing. Oftentimes, a friend of mine years ago was a preacher, and he said, the Christian life is like this, and I'm going to demonstrate. He says it's like this: victory, trial, problems, circumstances, victory. And that's what life many times is exactly like. So what do we do in the midst of that? Well, I told you what I do. We switched off the TV, after the last elections and all that hocus pocus and junk. I don't watch that stuff anymore. And you know what? It rebalanced my mind. And what do I do instead? Put on Christian music. I begin to sing along with what they have there. And thank God nobody else is in my car when I sing along, because they would, at the next traffic light, they would jump out. But there we go. These verses tell us not to look for joy in that stuff alone. Now, you can have that experience going to a football game, a hockey game, a baseball game, but that mustn't be the center of who you are and the center of your life, the center of your existence. The command is rejoice in the Lord. The instruction is go to Him in prayer. A bicycle wheel is solid and strong and useful, but if you remove the spindle, it becomes absolutely useless. To know these qualities, we need the centrality of Christ in our lives. We need to make sure that God is at the center of our lives. So in verse 6 and 7, we're given a command. Do not be anxious about anything. And here's this word anxious. What do we got to do instead? It says we got to pray. And then verse 7 says something will happen. It says, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. And then he gives us further instruction regarding prayer. He says, but in every situation, pray. What gas is to a car, prayer is to a Christian. What food is to the body, prayer is to the soul. Paul not only tells us that we need to pray, but how to pray. And notice he uses 3 words, and I'm going to just quickly run through them. Number 1, prayer is the general word we have when we speak to God. Every problem, large or small, we should try and take it to the Lord. Number 2, he talks about petitions. And the word there refers to specific requests. You can be like a shotgun or a sniper. We can pray generally, or we can pray specifically. And the third thing is thanksgiving. Appreciation to God for His concern and His love and His goodness. One of the saddest stories in the Bible is found in in Luke chapter 17, and it's the story of the healing of the 10 lepers. 10 lepers were healed, but only one came back to say thank you. And Jesus remarks about that and says, he's a foreigner. He's a Samaritan. He's somebody who was despised by the Jew, but he was the only one who turned around and came back and thanked Jesus. The others were Jews, but they failed to show gratitude, to return and give thanks to the one that healed them. Let me ask you this. How often in our day do we stop to thank the Lord? Why don't you make it part of your life when you are giving thanks for the food? Take a few moments extra. Look around you and thank the Lord for what you have. You know, you can be a half full tumbler, or you can be a half empty tumbler. It's up to you. So stand firm in practice, verse 8 and 9. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. Our mind is in the valley of decision, and it's in the mind that actions are formulated and choices are made concerning the actions we will take. And so Paul's next request is that these Christians have pure hearts and minds. These verses remind us that it's not enough just to learn, just to increase knowledge. That is not enough alone. So whatever you've learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, he's saying, put it into practice. Knowledge alone is not growth. You know, you can know the Bible from cover to cover. You go to the best universities in this world, and those who are in the theology department, man, they can quote any verse anywhere most times. They could show you where this is and that is. But you know, if they don't put their knowledge into practice, then it is worthless. It is just dead letter. Francis Bacon said it this way. It's not what men eat, but what they digest that makes them strong. Not what we gain, but what we save that makes us rich. Not what we read, but what we remember that makes us learned. Not what we preach, but what we practice that makes us Christians. And in conclusion, the issues we all face. My mind seems many times to have a mind of its own. When I want to meditate or ponder, my mind just wanders off in a tangent. How many found that? Oh, I have one honest man in this place. When I want to pray, my thoughts just seem to drift away. When I want to be pure, those wrong desires seem to just want to mount up. And yet, notice these instructions from Philippians chapter 4 concerning areas in our lives that we have control over. In other words, what he is saying to us this morning, folks, wherever you might find yourself today, whatever stuck position you are in today, you can get out of it with the Lord's help and with those people who love you. If we make the right choices and taking the right actions in the area, we can make strides in developing strong, stable mental wellness, and God will be glorified in the process. And it's not saying you have a mental issue. You just might be stuck in something or other. And you want freedom. You want to get out of it. You want to feel normal again, quote unquote. You want to feel better than you're feeling right now. And so come. And then what we'll do is we'll ask some of the body to come and put their arms around you, pray for you and with you. So let's do that right now. know there are people who have had issues this week. It seems like it is a mountain that's grown in front of you and you don't know what to do. You need to come. People have had challenges in relationships this week. Maybe it goes back longer than this week and you just don't know what to do. You're about to give up. You need to come. So let's stand and let's worship, and then those who need prayer, just come to the front and we can just pray with you and for you.